Okay, so this presentation is about novel compact superconducting cyclotrons for medical applications, a paper written by Day et al. From the Variable Energy Cyclotron Center in Calcutta, India. It was published in Physical Review Special Topics, Accelerator and Beams, 2013. What the authors present here isn't necessarily a groundbreaking design or large advancement in the terms of science. Um, but from the brief review of the literature that I have, it seems like that's sort of par for the course. Um, their design is based off of a one in the 1980s that made some slight modifications and advancements from ones in the 70s and 60s all the way back to the 1930s. And that's sort of the way that this progresses. Slow, steady changes, improvements can make more functionality, can expand the usage, can expand the distribution, and it comes to a real world outcome. So the goal of the authors was to provide a design that would accomplish the goal of an ultralight cyclotron that could be readily put into most hospitals or major clinics and provide the cocktail of radionuclides used in PET and SPECT imaging. And also, they, as a wrinkle, to increase the energy to the degree that they would now be able to produce technetium, which is the SPECT imaging workhorse, and is right now only commercially produced in reactors. But if they were able to implement this into hospitals, it would be a great democratizing principle in terms of making sure that this radionuclide is available for patients everywhere. I'm a medical physicist. That's why I decided to select this paper, because it had the word medical in it. And it wasn't totally my cup of tea. It's a little in the weeds, sort of get into the nuts and bolts of the design. And so what I hope to present here is really, to some degree, a translation of some of the jargon that was readily used in the paper for when you go over it. I think once I was able to get an idea of what they were doing and get an idea of all the terms that they were using, it really flowed quite well, and it's really clear that it's just a new principle at work here that's quite easy to follow. So, but let's start now at the with just a review of cyclotron operation. So as you can see from this diagram, the basic principle is that ions are injected into the center of two hollow metal donuts, in a way, and magnetic fields on either side causes them to rotate about the center, and an electric field accelerates them, and so it has a much more compact shape, much smaller than, for example, a synchrotron. And then once it's accelerated to a high enough energy, you just through sequential laps, you hit a target and you create a radionuclide that's interest to you, that will help you do whatever you want to do. And so, just kind of breaking it down into the parts here, the main construction is the Ds, which are the two hollow metal thingies, in which the ion makes its tracks. Um, the whole thing is put in a vacuum chamber, and in the typical design, there's a large magnetic bore on the top and bottom that cause the uniform magnetic field through the metal container, and RF frequency alternating uh, electric field causes the acceleration of the ions when they're in the gap between the two Ds. Um, so I thought that maybe rather than sort of a simple video, maybe something that showed it a little bit more. Well, you'll see. So obviously, a little uh, a little different. We're not just ions there. It's a metal ball, but just sort of demonstrates the principle of operation that um, by imparting the electric field into the ions at regular intervals, you're able to create an accelerating particle. And so, just to kind of elucidate the physics here, um, what we're dealing with is just a particle in a uniform magnetic field which is quite easily modeled in terms of its resonance and the radius at which it will orbit and the total energy that's possible from such a system. Um, and so I think some of the interesting things that you might notice is that ultimately the energy is reliant on the magnetic field actually, and so um, that's why the cyclotron represented an advancement from the Van de Graaff accelerators, because without needing to requiring the static electric field to accelerate particles, you didn't have to have that breakdown, and so um, you were able to get much higher acceleration. Also notice that uh, it's not super complicated in this realm, and we're going to see that that's going to change later on. But for most typical applications of cyclotrons, we're in a non-relativistic frame, and there's some simple physics at work here. So, um, what, cyclotrons are actually quite important because they're a particle accelerator that's quite widely distributed within our country, within the medical field. The reason being is that they produce radionuclides that are used in nuclear medicine for imaging and therapeutics, and an area of medical physics that's becoming much more prominent, proton therapy, also uses cyclotrons for acceleration of the protons. So as you can see here, um, we are we are able to produce in the standard cyclotrons that you'll find in hospitals all over the country, just about all the PET molecules that you'll need to image, a couple of SPECT, and we'll get back to that, and a couple of therapeutic. Um, but the impetus for redesigning is that we're missing out on certain things that are currently only being produced in reactors. And so that's these guys down here. And I think a couple of these, for example, iodine 131 is readily used as a therapeutic. Um, Yttrium 90 and strontium, radium, we use those at the veterinary clinic to treat tumors. So it'd be nice to be able to produce those on site if we had a cyclotron. And the big one is technetium-99, metastable, which is an FDA-approved single photon emission computed tomography imaging particle. And it's the workhorse. We'll get back to that later on. And that's what the authors are hoping to make cyclotrons do. So here's just an example of a PET scan. Actually, this isn't the scan taking place. It's just the scan has already taken place and it's been contrast improved and stuff. And that was just oops. That was just the doctor sort of scrolling through the created image. And so the authors relied on advancements from the typical cyclotron. And so I'll just go over those here over the next couple of slides to demonstrate sort of where cyclotrons have come, the new boys on the block. So there is a limit in terms of how powerful you can, or how energetic you can get the ions, and it's, as we saw, it's dependent on the magnetic field. And unfortunately, as iron, you can get more and more iron, and that'll improve your magnetic field strength. But you're kind of getting diminishing returns for larger and larger yolks, and so at that point, if you're making them that big, why not just go synchrotron, right? Well, and as a contrast to that, if you're able to supercool the magnets, you're able to get much higher magnetic field strengths, 3 to 5 Tesla range. And if you're able to do it with electromagnetics, then you can cut down on size, you can cut down on weight by using just coiled wires. And you can get very, very high energy particles. We're still not really in the synchrotron range, but we're small. We're creating a small, compact machine that gets us the energy we need for a certain application. And so in Michigan State, there is a superconducting cyclotron. Another advancement to the cyclotrons that the authors relied on for their design was isochronous cyclotron design. Just to sort of put this into broad terms, what it is that before in the diagrams you saw that we were creating these semicircular rotations that formed a spiral of the ion as it was accelerating. What the isochronous means is that it's no longer a circle. It's accelerated more in some parts and less in others, so that it becomes sort of a torus shape. The reason for this development is that now that as you start to accelerate these particles faster and faster, we're not able to use the standard physics that we were before, and relativistic considerations need to be taken into account. So using some sort of very classy advanced relativistic equations, the sort of field lines that were necessary within the magnetic field in order to accelerate as in order to accelerate the ion as it got faster into relativistic speeds. Um, this was developed I think during the 1970s, and it just sort of takes cyclotrons to that next step that it needs to in order to get faster, in order to get more energetic. And so this is what I was referring to. Um, we have uh, no longer semicircular path. Now it's sort of this box sort of thing where so what you can see here is that, like we said, the path of the ions is no longer circular. It's this sort of box shape. And also a part of the design that's sort of alluded to but not explicitly demonstrated here is that these regions here are actually uh, ridges. They're higher up than, and these regions here are depressed to make the magnetic field more inhomogeneous. Um, inhomogeneous. And the reason for that is to differentially accelerate the ions during their path and taking advantage of the natural focusing principles that happen in the transition regions um, of a sine wave. And so um, as the field is transitioning from valley to a hill, there's more focusing, and so you use the extra acceleration to return the ions back to being in phase. The inhomogeneous uh, magnetic field is referred to as flutter within this field. And so now we get to the sort of the predecessor of the paper that I selected, and this is a design that was created by Oxford Instruments. It's a superconducting cyclotron, and what their uh, contribution to the field um, was to greatly reduce the weight by making a superconducting cyclotron. And they were actually the first to remove the large solid pieces of the magnet and replace them with superconducting wires in order to cut down on that weight even more. And so their goals were to accelerate protons in order to get the cocktail of PET isotopes that are used clinically. And so you can see that even though they were able to create very high energies, they decided to operate within sort of a lower energy range, but what that gave them was more stability and efficiency. And you can see that the weight is quite low, and the size, um, because of the way that they were able to design their shielding, uh, was also quite reasonable for a hospital to house. And so now we get to the paper, and as I mentioned before, their goals for their design was to make something that was ultra lightweight while also getting to an energy level that was able to produce that Tech 99 that I was referring to before. So just to kind of elucidate why that particular radioisotope is so important is that, as you can see here, uh, it's a very frequently used radionuclide for nuclear medicine. It can be used in to image all these different areas with really good contrast, and it's lower energy than PET, um, and so you don't have to worry as much about the shielding considerations and the um, dose to the patient. And the energies, as are displayed here, 140 and 142. They're really close to the CT whole body uh, peak kilovolts range that's used within that imaging. And so it provides sort of a very easy transition to that modality, which is somewhat of an issue with PET, where the 511s that come out of an annihilation are quite high in energy, and so the images that you get actually need to be corrected in order to represent the dose. And so Tech 99 sort of helps to alleviate that. In terms of production, its parent has a much higher half life, and so Tech 99 is milked from that and eluted, and so actually the majority of the technetium 99 that we use comes from nuclear reactors, and these facilities in Canada produce the majority of the Tech 99 that we use. In the early 2000s, there was a shortage, and so you can see that there's sort of an impetus here for why you would want to have a more democratized distribution of this radionuclide production if it's going to be so widely used within the field. And just the reason that it's so it has such a high utility is just you can tag it to all these different pharmaceuticals, and it can get pretty much anywhere in the body and provide that contrast. So here's in the paper they talk about their design for their cyclotron, and like I mentioned, they're going to go ahead and remove the actual main physical giant magnet that would normally be there to create the magnetic field, and they're replacing that with coils. And so you can see here in the design, they actually use two circular coils as the main ones, and within those they have these sector coils, which if you can kind of recall from the diagram here, these are actually used to create the inhomogeneous magnetic field to bend the ions in this particular way. And so you can see here there's the sort of triangular shape, and that's sort of what we're creating there as well. They did mention that there were some, and it's an engineering paper, so perturbations upon perturbations. They have the big idea, and then they check it, and what are the issues that come up. And so within the sector coils themselves, there's these trim coils. Within the center, there's what they call the center coils, and it's just to create the perfect magnetic field that they want within this accelerator area. So just to break up the talking portion a little bit. Well, yeehaw. All right. So here's the computed, modeled magnetic field that they were able to produce within their accelerator. And they used these programs in order to evaluate that. And some of the practical considerations that they took into account was that as this thing got smaller, by taking away the large magnetic yoke, they were able to theoretically produce a better vacuum. And a better vacuum helps to ensure that you're not going to have Lorentz stripping of the ions as they traverse through, and you get a higher current of your particles to the end target, and you get a higher production. So as you can see here, we have the orbit now of the ions as they go through, compared to an analytical solution. And the operating principle here is that you want the frequency of the oscillation of the ions to be the same as the frequency of the operation of your alternating electric field. And so they were able to get that to a pretty high, well, it's a model, so they were able to get a pretty high efficiency there. As you can see here, they've gone through multiple iterations of adding iron shims in order to get that magnetic field just where it needed to be, just for demonstration purposes. That would be within these sector coils. They would add the iron shims to create the magnetic field that they needed. And that's a practical design that's also utilized within magnetic resonance machines that also use little sheets of iron to get that the magnetic field really homogeneous within the bore. Okay, so now we got to get those ions in there, and the authors decided to go with a spiral inflector to inject the ions at an angle so that they could begin this spiral progression. One thing I should have mentioned is that the D's, which would be surrounding the path here as the ions traveled through them, in the relativistic regime act as resonant cavities, and the ions as they travel through the D's impart image charge that sets up natural resonance harmonics of the electric fields between the ions and the D's. The authors explained that they plan to use the fourth harmonic because the fourth and eighth harmonic ensure the best vertical focusing of the beam. So here we get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of what the design is actually going to look like. They think that they can get it down to about 2,000 kilograms, including all the systems. It's all going to be superconducting current wires. They want to make sure that it's small and compact enough so that they can have a good vacuum, and that they can also ensure cryogenic stability over all of the coils to keep them superconducting. And just some more design principles. Additional interest is that we have to protect the machine from ambient radio frequency fields, and so there's a shield for that. And then the very exterior is going to be an iron cylinder at room temperature, and that actually bounds the magnetic field that's created within the cyclotron, so that if you have a metal hip, it doesn't get sucked in there, kill you. So that's good. And this is a pretty significant improvement over the Oxford Instruments paper, because they required that their magnetic shielding still be within the cryostat, so it cuts down on the size of what you need to keep cool. And just as a little treat, here's a quench in an MRI. So just thought this was pretty cool looking. Goes that magnetic field, and then it fills the room with like helium, which is Probably not poisonous, but if you breathe it in, you'll die because you won't have any breath. You won't be able to breathe. So yeah, that's it. Here's some references and stuff. Thank you.